Okay, so first of all, Erev Tov from Alon Shvut from Gush Etzion, and very excited to be with all of you here. And today, when I chose this topic that I was talking about, Moshe spies and Yehoshua spies, I didn't look at the calendar, and I had no clue that it was Parshat Shavua. And lo and behold, here we are, Parshat Shalach Lecha. So, sometimes, there are coincidences, and this is genuinely a coincidence because I had no clue. So I'm very happy to be giving not only a Tanakh Shir, but also a Parshat Shavua Shir, and excited to have everybody here. What I want to talk about today is obviously the story of Moshe spies and Yehoshua spies. That's our topic. But the topic is also going to be about the stories behind our stories. That we have stories behind our stories. And you always have to understand something in context. A good example might be the way that two different people look at any given situation, right? Coming from very different backgrounds, depending on, this might sound horribly postmodern, but if you're a right-wing voter or a left-wing voter, you might look at something very differently. If you're a Palestinian or if you're an Israeli, you might look at the current situation in Gaza very, very differently. And definitely there are stories behind our stories. And I want to talk a little bit about that in discussing what we're going to talk about today. And the main text we're going to be studying is actually the story of Yehoshua's spies. And I'm going to share my screen. Somebody asked before for the source sheet, but somehow I'm having a difficulty being able to share it in the chat because it's only allowing me to share something which is either on Google Drive. It's not letting me share from my computer for some interesting reason. So I'll see if I can manage to do it at some point, but at the moment it's not happening. Gee, one moment. If I just wait 1 minute, maybe I will be able to do this. Let me see if I can just very, very quickly upload it, and then we will be able to share it, and then everybody can be happy. And so hold on 1 moment. I'm just finding a way. Copy the link. Hold on a minute. Okay, anyone with a link? Copy link. Okay. I should be able to do it now. Okay, there is a link in the chat, and anybody who would like to can access the sheet now. Okay, but I'm going to share my screen, so there you have it. Okay, so let's take a look at what we have here. As you can see here, what you're seeing is Yehoshua Perek Bet. If we had more time, I would give you, if we were in a different format, I would give the opportunity to learn this b'chavruta, but this isn't such a hospitable environment for that. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to read it together. This is the Haftarah for this week, and so let's take a look. Vayishlach Yehoshua ben Nun ashitim shnayim anashim meraglim cheresh leimor lechu ru'u et haaretz ve'et Yericho. So Yehoshua, let me maybe give the background. Yehoshua has been given an instruction that in 3 days' time they are going to invade. It's pretty much Erev Pesach. It is the springtime, and they're being told that they're going to invade. And during these 3 days, the people are told to mobilize, and it's during these 3 days that he sends spies. Now, you might think that this is a terrible, terrible idea. After all, Moshe's spies didn't end up particularly well. But in a few minutes, we're going to see that there are some significant differences between Moshe's spies and Yehoshua's spies. And one of the key differences is that Yehoshua ben Nun sends them secretly, right? You know, maybe let's even start with this point. I'm just going to scroll down, please excuse me, and you will see a nice little table here on your sheet. Hopefully people can see it well. When we see Moshe's spies and Yehoshua's spies, okay, here we're going to see that Yehoshua sends only 2 spies. Who are these people? We don't know who they are. The word that's going to be used here is cheresh. Can you see that word here highlighted? Let me change the color. Hold on. Yeah, let's do it this way. The word here is cheresh. They are sent secretly, right? And it's only Shnayim Anashim. We actually never hear about who they are. These are the Mossad. They are secret people. I know there's a medrash which says that in fact it was Kalev and it was Pinchas. However, as far as we're concerned, these are not tribal leaders like Moshe sent. He doesn't send 12 when it can go horribly wrong. He sends 2 people, right? He sends them they are totally anonymous, they're secret service, and he sends them for 3 days, not 40 days like Moshe, where it could go horribly wrong. Moshe sent them to look at the entire land of Canaan, and we're going to see that Yehoshua sends them just to Jericho and its area. So, for example, if we now go back to our pasuk, he says, "Vayishlach Yehoshua ben Nun min hashitim shnayim anashim," 2 people, meraglim, they're clearly spies, cheresh, quietly, off record, leimor lechuru et haaretz ve'et Yericho. Okay, now here it says, and it translates it correctly here, the region of Jericho. Haaretz doesn't mean the whole land. We know from Sefer Yehoshua that there were, I think it's 31 kings, 31 sort of cantons in the land of Canaan, and so each place had its capital and the fields around it. So if you can imagine, in a minute we'll take a look at a map of the area. But if the Jordan Valley, let's maybe take a look already at the map so you can understand. Hold on, here it is. Okay, if you can imagine here, you have on the right-hand side is Eva Hayarden, right? The Jordan, that's to the right-hand side of the screen. And to the bottom of the screen, you've got Yam HaMelach. Through the center, you've got the Jordan, okay? And these people are meant to, and as you can you see Jericho, right? Anybody who's visited Jericho, right? Yericho on the left-hand side, you all well know that you have to go down and down and down, past that camel where everybody takes the pictures on the way down to the Dead Sea, right? And then you get to a plain, which is the Jordan Plain. But the Jordan Plain is flanked on the south side by Yam HaMelach, on the east side by the Jordan Valley, and on the west side by these huge hills. So we have Et ha'aretz Yericho. It doesn't mean the whole land. It means Eretz Yericho. It means the local area. Okay, and that's what they're going to. So they've got a very specific mission to go to a specific place to check out a given region of land. 2 people. They're going to be debriefed by the commander-in-chief himself so that it can't go too wrong and everything should be fine. Yehoshua has sort of like set it up so that nothing can go wrong, or can it? That's the question. So, hold on 1 second. So everything seems to be set that we shouldn't have any problems. And now let's see what happens. Right? They go to the house of an Isha Zona. This seemingly means a prostitute. Ushma Rachav. I don't know whether that's sort of euphemism. Her name is Wide. Okay. Now, I have to say, I should mention Rashi at this moment. Rashi likes saying that zonah comes from the word hazan, right? Like hazanet hakol. That in fact she is an innkeeper, and that she isn't a prostitute at all. Especially when you have a Chazal which talks about the fact that Joshua eventually married Rachav, then maybe this doesn't sound so good. However, we're going to go with the pshat when it usually says Isha Zonah v'chalala lo yikachu, right? In Sefer Vayikra, in Parshat Emor, it means a zonah, it means a prostitute. So let's go with the pshat here and not like Rashi. So as it says, a harlot. Now, why do they go to the house of a prostitute? Good question. Why do they go there? And the answer might be that a prostitute's place is a place where you can go without showing your identity card. Ever been to, a hotel and they ask you for your passport? Well, when you go to visit the prostitute, you don't need to show your passport. Moreover, the prostitutes will possibly, sell information for money. They might be very aware of the mood, right? Whether they've got more customers or fewer customers. Maybe, in fact, people who go there because they are under the guise of anonymity can go there in a state of maybe tongues can wag a little bit and they will be able to find out information. So that's one reason. The other reason, of course, is where is this house of the prostitute? It's in the wall, right? It's in the wall. And it might well be that they want a way in. They don't know at this point that God is going to make a miracle in Jericho. And in fact, if the prostitute's house is in the wall of the city, then who knows? They might be able to help, open a window somewhere and let somebody in. So they go and they sleep there. Or maybe better, as it says in the English, and they lodged there. Okay, what happens? What we're going to see is that Jericho is on high alert. Jericho obviously have their sentries out, and they know that the Israelites are mobilizing, amassing their troops, and they are, whereas they've been parked for a while, the Israelites are about to launch their invasion. And they're on a high alert. So the sentries saw people come at night to spy out the land. I don't know whether they were spotted going into Rachav's house, or maybe that's the obvious place to go. And he says, give us those men, right? They've come to spy the land. So give them over. I have to say something at this point, where this phrase "vatitzbeno" is a very interesting phrase. She takes these two people and she hides them, right? You know that word "vatitzbeno." You know it from the Haggadah, right? Remember, tzafon, is tzafun, right? Is the afichoman, right? Which you hide, okay? In the Kadesh Urchatz. But I'll just say that in Sefer Shemot, that verb is used for what? Do you remember? When baby Moshe is born, it says, Vatitzbeneu shlosha yirachim. They hid him for 3 months. It's almost as if she's hiding them up in the loft, like a mother hides a baby, right? I want you to remember that in a second. Anyway, we have that lovely word, Vatitzbeneu vatomer Cain. She says to the king's men, there were men, I didn't know who they were. And apparently what she says is they've gone. The gate was closing. The people left. I don't know where they went. They didn't leave long ago. So apparently they came at night. The king's men come during the day. And now we have a situation in which she says, they came, they left, go chase after them. But really, Pasuk Vav, he held Tamad Gaga, she took them up to the roof. She hid them under the wood. ha'aruchot la'al hagad. Obviously, people in this climate, especially in the climate of the Jordan Valley, where there's very little rain, keep their wood up on the roof. And Pasuk Zayin, and the army chased after them, Derech Yarden el Mabrot. They chased after them all the way to the Jordan until the crossing points. Vashar Sagaru, they closed the gates again at night. Acharei Keni Yetzu Arofim, etc., etc. The Hematerim Ishkavun, they hadn't even gone to sleep again. And again, it's not clear quite the timeline. The Elta, maybe they came towards evening and they were already intercepted the minute they got there. And she says they left before dark. They just stayed for an hour. They're still there. Whichever way she goes, and she says to them, Yadati, I know ki natan Hashem lachem et haaretz v'chi nafla imatchem aleinu v'chi namogu kol yoshvei haaretz mipnechem. I know that God has given you the land. Your dread has fallen on us, and we are all melted before you. Ki shamanu, because we heard how God has dried up the Yam Suf mipnechem b'seitchem Mitzrayim. God dried up the Reed Sea when you came out of Egypt, and we know how you've defeated the two Malchei Moria she'be'eva Yarden, Sichon and Og asher achramtem otam. Vanishma vayimaslo avenu, our hearts have melted. V'lo kama od ruach. We have nothing to stand. Be'ish mipnechem ki Hashem Elokechem hu Elohim b'shamayim yival ba'aretz mitachat. What an unbelievable speech. We're going to come back to this speech in a minute. And now what does she do? She says, please make an oath with me. Ki asiti machem chesed, I looked after you. V'asitim gam atem im beit avi chesed, and you should be kind to me and my family. V'natatem li ot emet, and give me a promise. V'chiyitem et avi v'et imi v'et achai v'et achiotai. You should keep all my family. She's got a long list. She's got this already. She knew why she was hiding them. She was waiting for these men. She's got a list. You'll save all of us. You want to live? Make sure that my family lives. And the men say to her, Nafshenu tachtechem lamut, im lo tagidu et dibarnu zeh. You got a promise. You'll be risking your life if you breathe a word about the fact that you are here. And indeed, when God gives us the city, we will do with you chesed ve'emet. And she let them out of the window. Ki beita b'kir hachoma uv'choma hi yoshevet. Right? She let them out of the window because her house was in the wall. Uv'choma hi yoshevet. Right? And maybe I will mention something here which a good friend of mine, Rabbi Michael Hattin, wrote in his book on Sefer Yehoshua. And he says this interesting, Beita Bakir, her house is in the wall, Bakir HaChoma, sorry, 1 second, Bakir HaChoma, Uva Choma hi Yoshevet. And he says, why would Rachav sell out on her city? Why? And he said, we see it in the movies, right? So, frequently a woman is not going to go into prostitution. Or let's put it this way, women who go into prostitution, that isn't the first choice of any young woman. Her first choice of profession. Not an honorable profession. It's a profession in which people are abused. Why would a woman go into prostitution? And frequently it's because they've had a very hard background. They might have been abused as a child. They might have fallen upon hard times, and this is the only way they can make money. But frequently, not everybody's particularly nice to the prostitutes. They go under themselves under false identities. And he says, that's what it means. She lives in the periphery of the city. She doesn't feel like she owes the city anything. Frequently, these are people who have this is their last resort. They've got no other way to make a living, and they gain their status through this, the world's, what do they call it? The world's oldest profession. But that doesn't mean they really feel part of society. They are on the periphery of society. They are people who feel they don't owe anyone anything. And therefore, it might well be that as far as she's concerned, she's happy to sell her city and to gain a new lease on life, to gain a new status with the Jewish people. And that might explain not only Beita Bakir HaChoma, not only is a house in the wall, Uva Choma hi Yoshevet. She lives on the periphery. She lives on the outer perimeter. She is an outsider to her own society. Okay? Anyway, she gives them advice what to do. Go up to the hills, hide there for 3 days till all the people chasing you have gone back. And verse 22, they went straight to the hills. They stayed there for 3 days until the pursuers turned back. And the pursuers, searching all along the road, did not find them. And then the two men came back from the hills and crossed over. And they came to Yehoshua ben Nun and reported to him all that happened to them. And they said to Yehoshua, the Lord has delivered the whole land into our power. In fact, all the inhabitants of the land are quaking before us. Well, I don't understand. These men are possibly the worst spies that we've ever seen. They go on a mission to go and apparently gain military knowledge about a city, but no sooner do they get there, they don't have a chance to check out the armaments and the fortifications. They don't have a chance to do anything. All they do is they almost get caught. I wonder when they got back to Yehoshua, the commander-in-chief, what did they say to him? Right? We got there within an hour, we were found out, and there was a kind woman who looked after us, gave us a way out, essentially extorted us to go and save her family. And then we spent the rest of the days in a cave somewhere up in the hills, right? And here we've come down. How exactly do they know that everybody's quaking before them? What's going on here? Are these literally the worst tribes ever? Really a bumbling pair, I've got to say. That image of when she hides them, but it's name like Tzipporah hiding Moshe from the Egyptians. It's this very mothering image, but if she's the mother, then they're babies. And we don't really get such a great impression of them. So what exactly do we want to say here? So let's see what we can do. So what I want to try and do is, as I said before, compare Moshe's spies with Yehoshua's spies and take a look at the story here. I'll go back to the screen. Here we go. As we said, Moshe sent out this delegation of elder statesmen. All right, when we look at the story of the spies, he sends 12 spies, one for each tribe. Ish echad lashavet. Kulam anashim rashi bnei Israel hema. They are all politicians. So he's sending tribal leaders, 12 of them. This is like a national delegation. Ross Soloveitchik says that they're meant to be the people's representatives to make a kinyan with the land. But what I want to try and say is that these people aren't well-trained soldiers. They seem to be scared easily. They seem to be intimidated. And to go for 40 days, which is a long expedition, to see the entire land of Canaan, and then to report back to the entire nation, right, is a very risky business. As we said, Yehoshua doesn't do it, but let's take a look and see what really happens when they go there. Where did they go wrong if we think that Yehoshua's men got it right? So we all know how it begins. Shalach lecha anashim, send men, let them tour the land of Canaan. And where did it go wrong? And here I'm looking at verse 22. I hope you can see it on your screen. Vaya'alu b'negev, they went up through the Negev. Vayavo ad Chevron, they came to Chevron. V'sham achiman sheshai v'telmai yilidei ha'anak. There is achiman sheshai v'telmai yilidei ha'anak. They are the children of the Anak. Now, Anak, I assume, means somebody big. We'll see that in a second. Interestingly enough, they are not the Anak himself. They are his children, okay? And the idea that, by the way, that they cut down Zmurav, Eshkol Anavim, and that they took back monster fruit, right? You know that image of the spies carrying a bunch of grapes. You've seen it on the, I always find it funny because it's on the Carmel wine, but it's also the symbol of the Israeli tourism ministry. I don't know who ever thought about that. Whoever thought that the worst tourism experience ever, where the people came back and hated the country, would become the symbol for the tourism ministry? What a bad, what bad branding. But anyway, the story there, if you look, it's one huge bunch of grapes, these monster grapes. I just want to debunk that. I think when it says that they took a zmurav eshkol anavim echad, what they're talking about is, well, I'll just talk for myself. I have one vine in my garden, and it trails over a trellis, over a pergola. Last year, we got something like 5 buckets full of grapes off a single vine. There must have been 40 bunches of grapes on this, and the amount of wine we could make out of it was pretty unbelievable. And that's what I imagine. What they took, they cut down a vine because they want, and 2 people had to carry it on a mot, but what they wanted people to see that it was cascading with bunches of grapes. I know the people were huge, and somehow the Midrash says that the fruit was huge, but I don't get the sense that that is really the pshat. Whichever way, when they come back, this is what they say. Verse 27. They say, Banu el haaretz asher shalchtanu, we come to the land, v'gam zabat chalav udvash, it is flowing with milk and honey, v'zeh priyah, here's the evidence. Efes, but ki asa am yoshev ba'aretz, the people are fierce. V'arim b'tzurot gedolot mod, and they've got fortified cities. V'gam yilidei ha'anak ra'inu sham. Now, what does that tell you? We saw giants there. Amalek yoshev be'eretz ha'negev, v'achiti v'yevusi amori yoshev b'har, v'aknani yoshev alayam, v'alei ha'ardeim. We saw Amalek there and other nations. The people get scared. And why do they get scared? Well, let's see what they say when they're countered. Vayahaz Kaleb, verse 30. Vayahaz Kaleb eta'am. Kaleb hushed the people and said, let us by all means go up and we can gain possession from it. We shall surely overcome it. But the men who gone up said, we cannot attack it, for they're stronger than we. And they spread calumnies, right? So the phrase dibat haaretz, lashon hara about the land. And they say, and here's the critical line, the land eats its inhabitants. All the people we saw of it were men of great size. By the way, that's not the translation. If you can translate Hebrew, all the people we saw in it were men of midot. Right? Have you ever heard in Hebrew of people talking about, does he have good midot? Right? A midah is simply a measure. Right? It's simply a measure. Right? When we say, does he have good midot or does she have good midot? What are we saying? The question is, what is the measure of a man or a woman? And the answer is, are they polite? Are they kind? Do they visit the sick? Do they go visit their grandmother? Right? In other words, all midah means a measure. What they're saying is the people are of great measure, but what they mean is great physical stature. When we use the word midot, we say, what is the measure of a man? Is how they behave. And then they say, V'sham ra'inu et ha'nefilim b'nei anak min ha'nefilim v'anihi b'einu k'chagavim v'chein hayinu b'einehem. Right? Very famous pasuk. We saw the Nephilim, the children of the Anak who come from the Nephilim. And we appeared in their eyes like grasshoppers, and so we were in their eyes. Well, we looked to grasshoppers to ourselves, and we all know this line, that they saw themselves as grasshoppers. They don't know what the people said. There is a midrash which says that they walked past the walls, and those giants said, well, what are those grasshoppers down there? But that's a midrash to explain this phrase. What they're saying is we felt we were so small, and so we saw them as very big. But why? And by the way, this is what caused the people to break into loud cries, and they wept all night. Terrible. By the way, who disagrees? Joshua ben Nun and Caleb son of Yefuneh disagree, and they say, if the Lord is pleased with us, will bring us into the land. Have no fear, don't be afraid. They are our prey. Right? If the Lord is with us, have no fear of them. So I want to talk a little bit about this. And I want to focus on this phrase, the Anakites are part of the Nephilim. We saw the Nephilim. What is this idea of the Nephilim? So let me, maybe, before I even get to the Nephilim, let me point out This parsha from Devarim chapter 9, this is Moshe speaking 40 years later or 39 years later. And listen to what Moshe says. Moshe says this, Shema Israel, listen Israel, the enemies are stronger than you. This is exactly what the spies said, right? Cities with walls sky high. Angadol varam b'nei anakim. These are people who are sons of giants. And you've heard, Mi yitziat save ifnei b'nei anak. Who can face down a giant? But you should know, v'yadata yom ki Hashem Elokecha hu over lefanecha eish ochla. Hu yashmidem v'hu yachniem. You should know that God walks before you. He is like a devouring fire. He will wipe them out. In other words, if God's on our side, you don't need to worry about any obstacle. Well, what are the people thinking? And here, the key is in Bereshit Perek Vav. Bereshit Perek Vav says this. Do people know this story? It's an amazing story. It's so cryptic. It's very weird. Some people think about the story about fallen angels. Here we go. Humankind, this is literally a paragraph before God decides to destroy the world with a flood. And it says, when human beings spread over the world, ubanot yuldu lahem, and they had daughters. How surprising, right? Not only male progeny, but female progeny. Ooh, well, how strange. Anyway, Vayu b'nei Elohim, and the sons of God, or the sons of, it's not clear who they are. Rashi says they're the sons of the judges, the kings, who knows? They saw kitovotena, these women were pretty, and they took women from whoever they wanted. In other words, they seized women like, I don't know, like Shechem ben Chamor seized Dinah and they rape them or whatever it is. Vayomar Hashem lo yadun ruchi ba'adam le'olam. I am not going to let humankind endure forever. B'shagamu basar v'yamav mea be'esrim shana. And the world's only going to exist if it doesn't change. I'm giving it 120 years. And now listen to this verse. The Nephilim were on earth then. We're back to our Nephilim. Hanephilim ayu ba'aretz haim. V'gam acharei kein asher yavo b'nei ha'elohim al banot ha'adam. When the sons of God cohabited with the human women who bore them offspring, such were the mighty men of old, the men of renown. They are the giborim Hashem me'olam anshe Shem. Now, if we had more time, we would spend time looking at all of the commentaries here. But I think I'd just like to go with what sounds like the pshat. What does the pshat sound like here? To me, it sounds like, right, what we're saying is that there were, right, you know, a little bit of Greek mythology when you have, you know, a god who, you know, cohabits with a human being, and you create what? A Hercules. You create some sort of superhuman, right? The world of mythology is made of this sort of stuff. Am I correct? Yeah, that's in other words, you have these sort of demi-gods, half human, half godly, and they have superpowers, right? Like, you know, I don't know, like Superman, right? Who comes from sort of somewhere else. Spider-Man, whatever. All these things are like, you know, half human with some other power. These are the Nephilim. These are the Giborim, Hashem Eolam Anshe Shem. And now we understand what spooked Moshe's tribe, Moses' spies. They come and they see those Anakim and they say, who are these Anakim b'nei Anak? They are the Nephilim b'nei Anak. Oh my gosh, these are these primeval. We have read about these in our mythology books. We read our Greek myths in our history class. And who is going to be able to face down Spider-Man, Superman? These guys have, look at these people, look at their size. Anshe midot. They are the Nephilim, b'nei Anak b'nei Nephilim. These are superhuman people. Right? I'm making some sense here. So I think that's what's happening here. I think that's what we're seeing here, that there is a story behind the story. And the story behind the story is that when the spies see these giants, They say, we are like grasshoppers. Why did they think that? Because they said these are not just the Bnei Anak. These are the Bnei Anak min Nephilim. Okay, we're good? And now I come back to our story and the story of Rachav. And what I want to claim is that the story of that we're going to read in the Haftarah this week, the story of Rachav with the two spies, is the negative, the inverse of that story. First, by the way, let me just say that it could well be that in the end, the spies actually succeeded in gaining more information than we imagine. Again, maybe that's why they went to the wall. They wanted to check out the walls, how thick the walls are. I already mentioned that at this stage, Yehoshua doesn't know that there's going to be a miracle. So maybe what happens is they go to the walls, they check out the walls. That's why they go to the prostitute who was in the walls. And then think about what happens. I don't know whether they planned it this way. She lets them out the window and says, go up to the mountains. Now, when they go up to the mountains, imagine that they're hiding somewhere where that word Hama'aravi is on the left-hand side of the screen. They can sit there with a pencil, paper, and literally draw out the whole valley, all the roads, all the by roads. In fact, for 3 days, the Jericho army is looking for them so they can report on army movements, what their chariots, how many chariots travel together. After 3 days, they stop looking for them. They sneak back over the Yarden, right? And first of all, they probably have already drawn a map. They've been able to do a survey of the walls and how thick they are. They, by the way, have an accomplice in the city. They don't need to go and penetrate the gates. She's going to let down a rope and they're going to climb in and get into the city. They don't know that the walls are going to come tumbling down. So I don't think they were as unsuccessful. But as we said, they were almost caught. So I want you to pay attention to the way Rachav treats them. Let's go back to our first page, and then we're going to give a whole different explanation, but we'll get there in a second. Okay? Look what she says when she speaks to him. It says, hadn't yet gone to sleep. And she comes up to them and says, Yadati ki natan Hashem lachem et haaretz ki nafla eimatchem aleinu v'gam namogu kol yoshvei haaretz mipneichem. Says, I know that God has given you the land. We're all terrified of you, right? Everybody here, everybody's quaking because we've heard how you dried up the Yam Suf, how you defeated Sichon and Og, right? And we heard Vayimaslav Avenu, and we are all, our hearts are melting. And now she says, what's the story behind her story? Do you remember how Moshe's spies looked at the giants? They said, oh, you are these primeval beings. You are demigods. How does she look at these two? And by the way, I think that the two spies are described like a baby. They're described like bumbling, almost caught. In order to, sometimes there's a funny story. They tell a story here in Israel about two guys who are in the army. They don't really do very much. They sit around in bed all day. They're what we call in Israel jobnikim. They're not particularly, and they're at a, they're taking a hitchhike home, and they're at a gas station somewhere, and a long drive, a bus of tourists, right? And the tourists come along and they see two soldiers who are in army uniform, and they come up to them and they say, thank you for protecting us. Thank you for protecting the Jewish people, right? And these two people who are like basically been doing nothing all week, right, are cracking up laughing because like, what do you mean you're thanking us? We're not Sayeret Matkal. We're not a commando unit. We haven't been in Gaza. We haven't been doing very much. We've actually been wasting our time and playing Sheshbesh all week. But so what are those people saying? You symbolize the Israeli army to us. As far as we're concerned, when we see you with the Tzahal emblem on your shirt, you might as well be the people who saved the hostages from that house in Gaza. They don't know. As far as they're concerned, Tzahal, that's how, do you understand? Rachav is the inverse of Moshe's Meraglim. The Meraglim looked at the giants and said, "Oh my God, I'm terrified." How does Rachav look at these two men? "Oh my God, we're terrified. You're the people from whom God dried up the Yam Suf. You're the people who defeated Sichon and Og. You are superhuman. You are demigods. And now in front of you, I want to say, Hashem Elokeichem Hu Elohim b'shamayim mimal v'alaretz mitachat. I'm ready to convert. I'm ready to become one of you, right? You see what I'm trying to say? The story of Rachav is exactly the inverse of the story of Moshe's spies. And in fact, it's deliberately written as almost like a parody to show that they almost, get caught. But in order to bring home this point about quite the power of this event. As far as I can see, we've got about 10 minutes left on the clock. And I would like to give you a second reading of this story in Sefer Yehoshua. And for this, we're going to go right down to page 3, where you will see another table here. And let's understand. In order to do, what I want to do is I want to make a parallel between Jericho and Sodom. And you might think that this is rather strange. Okay, I'll give you all the linguistic stuff in a second. But let me first help you by comparing the two stories. First of all, Jericho and Sodom sit in the same valley. I don't quite know where Sodom is, whether Sodom is where the hotels are by the Dead Sea, or some people think it is literally across the Jordan on the northeast bank of the Jordan. It's not clear where Sodom was, but whichever way, they both sit in the same valley, right? So in the valley of the Dead Sea. Think about the story like this. Two anonymous people, come into a city on the eve of its destruction. Somebody takes them in and offers them protection. The authorities of the city, the people of the city, come knocking on the door and say, "Where are the men you took in?" And they say, "Don't take the men, I protected them." And then those two men, may you make a deal with them, and they actually help somebody to escape, right? To escape up to the hills, right? In order to save themselves, and the whole city is going to be destroyed. Sounds like a familiar narrative? I could be talking about Joshua chapter 2, but I could be talking about the story about Lot and Sodom. In a way, they're the same story. Now, what is so remarkable here is that, in fact, there are a huge number of textual parallels between the two stories. So take a look at these parallels, which you see now on the screen. In Sodom, Vayavo Shnei Malachim Sodoma Ba'erev, right? Here also it says, well, we see they're called Malachim, and we know that they come towards evening because we're told. Okay, so we've got the Shtei Malachim. Interestingly enough, in both cases, the people come in the story of Lot. Bring them out. Here also, Hotziu anashim asher ba'u lebeitecha. Right? Okay. Not only that, this idea of closing the door. Lot hadelet sagar harav. Here, vayi hashar lizgor. So we've got the idea of closing the gates. The phrase, a very unusual phrase, terem yishkavu. They hadn't yet gone to bed. Vehema terem yishkavun. This is not incidental, right? We call this intertextuality. This means that whoever wrote Yehoshua chapter 2 had Bereshit Perek Yutet open when he was writing it, right? You've got the idea of po chatanu vanecha v'notecha who are all going to get saved. And here, avi v'etimi v'etachai v'etachotai. The same phrase, haharahim aleit pentis hafer. Go up to the hills, run to those hills. And here, haharalechu penifkeu bachem. And the notion of chesed. They say, you've been so kind. Here, ki asiti imachem chesed. Right? And the notion of chesed. Okay, have I proved this enough? Right, I think that's a good number of parallels, right? I always say that when you have a parallel of this sort, that what they're trying to say is that there's some sort of repetition. Let me give you an example. Do you remember when Yosef is sold to Egypt and he goes down in a Yishmaelite caravan down to Egypt? And it says there, Ugmalehem nosim, and their camels are carrying nechoot. 1 second, let me get the exact quote. Sorry, 1 minute. Here we go. Ugmalehem nosim nechoot utzri valot. They're carrying these 3 spices, nechod, v'tzari, v'lot. Interestingly enough, when the brothers go down with Benjamin, right, they take Benjamin down to see the viceroy, who he don't realize is Yosef. Yaakov sends them down with what? He says, take them a gift. Mat tzari or mat davash nechod v'lot. Botni mushkedim. Put it very simply, the smell which is in Yosef's nostrils when he goes down to Egypt is the same smell in the brothers and Binyamin's nostrils. What they're trying to say is this is the same story. If we were filming it now, right, we would have them going down in their, when Yosef's going down, the Ishmaelites turn on the radio and there's a song. And when the brothers go down with Binyamin, they turn on and it's exactly the same song. That's what happens with intertextuality. They want to give you a sort of a unity, and they do this by using similar language. What is, very simply, what's happening here? One of the questions behind the capture of Sodom and the entry into the land is, what did the Jerichoites do wrong? Are they particularly bad? We haven't heard anything about Jericho. What do they deserve to be destroyed? And I think behind the scenes, through this intertextuality, what's Sefer Yehoshua saying? Don't worry. Jericho is Sodom. Jericho and Sodom are one and the same. You had no qualms. You saw the attempted rape in Sodom. You know the people of Sodom wouldn't welcome anybody. Don't worry. Jericho is exactly the same. So I think these are 2 very interesting lenses on the story of our Haftorah this week. I'll just very quickly summarize. We read through the story and we saw how these 2 spies aren't up to very much in terms of the spying business. We certainly wouldn't give them a second run as spies. And why is it written as if they're so bumbling? And what our claim is that they are in some way the negative, the inverse of Moshe's spy story. Moshe's spies got spooked by the giants who they saw as being some sort of primordial creatures, demigods. And therefore, once they saw that, there was nothing more to be said. What we see is the inverse. Even though these 2 people are a little bumbling and not so effective, the minute, because they represent the Jewish people and they represent Hashem, the minute Rachav sees them, she says, whoa, you're the people who dried up the Yam Suf. You represent God. Hashem Elohim b'shamayim yimal v'al mitachat. At the same time, our chapter has another agenda, which is to show the parallels between Sodom and Jericho, giving us no doubts at all that this place needs to be destroyed, this place needs to be taken over, and Am Yisrael, the people of God, need to come and create a more just regime in its place. So that's it. Thank you very much for joining me. And if there are any questions, I'd be very happy to hear them.
Could you put that map back on the screen if possible? I'd like to take a screenshot or put it into the chat.
Sure. Hold on a second. Hold on. Share. Here it is. The map comes from a choveret which was produced by the Herzog Institute about a long time ago, about 30 years ago or something, 25 years ago. And I just simply took a screenshot of it and loaded it up. But I wanted to be able to explain the geography a little bit, and I thought it was actually quite a good illustration for our purposes of what we have. Okay. Thank you very much, and I hope you've had a good day of learning and enjoyed the Tanakh. And Lehitraot. Hope we'll have lots of other opportunities. You know what? I'll use my last minute to say that I actually have a daily podcast. It's called the Tanakh Podcast. I've recorded all of Nevi'im, and I'm currently going through Ketuvim, through Tehillim. I'm going at the pace of 929. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, and you can find it on Spotify. And it is called the Tanakh, Tanakh. It's 10 minutes a day, a chapter a day, 5 days a week, and it hopefully can help you get through not only Nevi'im Rishonim, Nevi'im Achronim, and now we have started Ketuvim. So if anybody's interested in joining me to listen and to participate, we've got about 250 people every day listening, and be happy for you to join us. Toda Rabbah, and Lehitraot.